In this lecture, we are going to explain what is the difference between normal Redux Store and Redux Toolkit. Okay, so we are going to demonstrate two projects with Redux Store and Toolkit. If you can see in my desktop, I have created two projects, Redux Store and Toolkit. What I am going to do, I am going to run my first project, Redux Store, first time. Okay, so in this project I am going to set up all the normal Redux store setup and I am going to hit one API. Okay, then I am going to replicate the same project with the toolkit so that we can understand the difference between two libraries. Okay, now first of all, what I am going to do, I am going to open my project in VS Code. Yes, then we can just open the Redux store project first. Yes, we have opened the project. Now go to the app.js file and I am going to remove all the by default code generated by React Native. Here we are just going to remove all this. Okay, we can just keep our app functional component. Here I am going to create a app functional component. Fine. We can just remove this node. Yes, const app. We can just clear this all and just add a view here. View style flex equal to 1 and I am giving a background color of just we can say green. Okay, then I am just going to remove all other code and also I am going to create my style sheet so that project will be very minimal and I am just refreshing. Now what they are saying, there is an error, we didn't imported view, right? So we can just import view and react. Import react from react. Also we can just import view. Import view from React Native. Okay, so we have just created our we can just refresh now. Just remove this one and refresh. Here you can see the background color is coming. Now what I am going to do, I am going to import my button. Now if you don't know about React Native button, just search and just close all this tab. Okay, React Native button. I'm going to search the syntax and title everything. Here you can see the button. Now I'm just copying this button into my project. Here, copied. Okay, so you can just remove this accessibility label and we can just have a button here, increment. Now what I am going to do, I am going to set up a Redux store for incrementing a value. Okay, so just create this function as well, on press increment. Now we can just const on press increment is added here. Now we can just refresh it once more. Yes, I can see the increment. What I am going to do, I am going to center this button, justify content, align item center, and also I am just giving a padding of 40 so that button will be at the center. Yes, now what I am going to do, I am just adding the style sheet, const style sheet dot create. Okay, you can just add the container style here, copy this old style into here, then just refer the object style dot container. Okay, now we can see our button is rendered correctly, right? Now what we can do, we can just add one more text here, text style. I'm just adding a style, sorry, I'm just adding the style as well for the text. Here I'm just adding a count. Okay, now for this text I am adding some style. Font size we can just give 13 and font weight we can just have a bold, and color we can just give white. Then we can have some margin bottom 30. Okay, so we have a margin 30. Now we can just close this one, and we can just check our text is rendered. Now what I am going to do, I am going to increment this counter value using our common Redux store. So first of all, what I am going to do, I am going to set up a Redux store in our application. For that one, what I am going to do here, inside this I am going to create one src folder, and here what I am going to do, I am going to just create one file home. You can just say home screen.js. Then I'm just copying this old code into home screen. Okay, just renaming this home screen. Then we can just go here, home screen. I'm just going to import my home screen into app.js. Import home screen from src home screen. Then we can just replace all this code with the home screen, right? So it make a container component. We can just remove this old styling, and then again we refresh. So it will be the same, right? We didn't change anything. We just moved all this file into home screen.js, and then we just imported that home screen into our app.js file. Now what we are going to do, we are going to set up a common Redux store in this file. Okay, so what we can do, here I am going to create one reducer, counter reducer .js. Then what we need action type, right? So we can just create action type.js. Then what we have done, we need a store file. Okay, so store.js. So we can just write down the step what we are going to do. We have creating a reducer file, we have created a action type. We can just copy this into here so that it can easily write down. So first of all, what we are going to do, this we can remove here. We have just created a reducer file, which is counter reducer. Then we have created a action type file, and then third thing, we are just creating store. Okay, then the fourth step, what we are going to, we need to install lot of libraries for creating our store, right? So we can just go through the libraries one by one. So I'm going to add yarn, add Redux we need, then we need React Redux, right? So then we need Redux thunk for asynchronous action. So we have installed three library: Redux, React Redux, Redux thunk. One more library I am going to add is Redux logger for logging the Redux action. So I'm just add Redux logger as well, then install. So we can write down the step here. Fourth step, installing libraries Redux. Then we have Redux, React Redux. Then we have Redux logger, and then we installed Redux thunk for asynchronous action, right? So we have installed Redux thunk. So we have installed four library. One is Redux, React Redux, Redux logger, and Redux thunk. So let us wait for completion of this library. So meanwhile, we can just create our action type, right? So we need action type. For incrementing, we need export increment. We need an action type, right? Increment. Then we need another action, export const decrement. So we have created two action type here, export const increment and export const decrement, right? Then we need a reducer. We can just import this action type, increment and decrement, and then decrement from the action type. Okay, we have just imported this one. Then what we need an initial value, right? So we can just type const initial value. we can just have an initial value counter equal to 1, right? So we have initial value here. Then we need a reducer, right? So we can just create a reducer, const counter reducer. We need to pass two parameters, state action, right? So state initial, I'm passing my initial value. So here I'm just passing my initial value, right? Then we need to close this here, right? So you can just remove this rest. So we have created a reducer. We can just export this one, export default counter reducer. Then inside this we are going to define different action type, right? Whatever the reducer has to be handled, we are just going to create a switch case here according to the action dot type is coming, right? So we have just declared a switch case. Now what we need different cases, right? When the action type is increment, what we need to increment the value, right? So we can just have our counter is equal to state dot counter plus 1. Then if the decrement case, we need to decrement the value, right? So we can just have a copy paste and then we can just decrement this value when the action type is decrement. The another thing is default case. So if you didn't if you didn't define default case, it will cause an error on the initial time. So we can just return a state, right? So we have created a reducer. Now what we need to set up our store, right? So for setup, if you have any doubt, we can just refer this HTML. So we can just copy this one, go to the store. So here I am going to import two functions, create store and combine reducer from the library Redux. Meanwhile our libraries all have installed, you can just check. And then what we need, the next thing is we need apply middleware for attaching thunk and logger. So you can just copy here. Then what we need thunk, obviously, right? Then what we need to define our root reducer. So defining a root reducer, so you can just create a root reducer, const root reducer, where we'll combine all our reducers, right? So we can just combine reducers. So if you have any doubt, we can just copy this one, paste it here. So we are combining all the reducer, and just remove this one. So we can just combine our reducer. Here I am going to import my reducer, import counter reducer from counter reducer. Here I am just declaring as counter and then passing the counter reducer. Now what we need to export our store, right? So we can just check out our method. Here is the method, const configure store. We can just add this configure store here. So create store I have already added. Then what we need a root reducer. Now we can just export this one, export default configure store. Alright, we can just call this as a function, so that we just need to only import as a store, right? Now here in this app.js file, I'm going to attach this reducer, right? So how we can do this one? We can just refer this one. I need the provider. Here I'm just going to add my provider. Fine. Then inside this provider, I'm going to supply my store, right? So just supply my store. Then just paste this one here. So my component is wrapped in the provider, right? We can just have console our store, what is getting console.log store. Then again we need to run the application once more. You can just run. Yes, error is coming. Const store is okay. We didn't imported our store. We can just import our store, import store from src store. Okay, now if I refresh, let's see, it should work. We can just debug using Control M, debug. Yes, we can just inspect on the console. Yes, we are getting our reducer here. So we can just console store dot get state, we can just console what are the values receiving. Yes, I'm receiving my counter value. Here you can see the counter value is coming. So the next thing is we can just add our Redux logger as well. So we can just go here. I'm just creating an array const middle where here I am passing thunk, as well as I am going to import my logger, import logger from Redux logger. Okay, so I'm just passing my logger here as well, and then I'm just applying this middleware here. Okay, now we can just refresh. Okay, we need to provide this as an array. We can just pass this as an array. Now if I just refresh, some error is going. We can just check out the documentation of Redux logger. Sorry, here is the Redux logger npm. We can just check out the documentation, import logger from Redux logger. Fine, I've just imported my logger. Yes, apply middleware, logger is there. So we can just check a logger with a thunk in Redux. Yes, user. Yes, so here is the example. We can just add this as here. We don't need the array here. Just add this. We can just, yes. Now if I just go to the my checker here, I am getting the logger. Okay, now the next thing is we need to attach this value into our home screen. For that one, what I am going to do here, I am going to import. So this is a functional component. We can just need connect function. So we can just import our connect function. We can just say connect. Yes. So this is a Rogel method. You can just connect. Yes, here is the connection method. You can just add the connect. The next thing is we need to add two things: dispatch to prop and a dispatch to action, right? So we can just here copy this one, paste it here. So home screen, you can just have home screen here. Remove this one. So we can just declare map state to props once const map state to props. Here we can just return state, and inside this one we should have a return. We can just return counter state dot counter, right? Now we need to attach the action, right? So we have an action. What is the action type here? We can just go to the so we didn't declare action, right? We can just declare our action folder. Clear? Here I am just creating two action: export const increment. Here is the first action. Here I will be returning one type. Here just I am returning my type. Fine, I need to import my type, right? So we can just import our type from action type. Here decrement. Yes, now this can be imported from action type, and the increment we can just add it here. Same way we can just create decrement action, decrement, sorry, so we can just dispatch decrement action type here. And what I am going to do, I am going to import these two action into my home screen. We can just import increment, and then the next action is decrement, right? So we can just import this decrement here from action. So the same thing you can do with hook as well. I am not care about hook right now. I'm just using the classical method. Here I'm just attaching my action, right? Fine. Now what we need, we can just format this document. Yes, it's already format. And what we can do, we can just assess the value here. So here you can just add my props. Just check out what are the values coming on props. I'm just consoling my props. Then we can just remove this one and again reload. Now here you can see two counter reducer is also coming and getting increment and decrement, right? So I'm just going to console this one here. So here I can just pass my props dot counter counter, right? So we can just have, we can directly dispatch counter, so we can just have props dot counter here. Fine. Now if I refresh, it should represent one value. Now we go to my reducer, we can just check it is coming from here itself. We can just change into 3. Now it should come as 3, right? Yes, 3 is coming. Now what we need, we can just go into the home screen. On the on press button, we can just call this props method. We can just distract our methods here, const increment and decrement from props. So it is described. So we have just distracted the object. Now what we can call, can just on press, we can just call our method increment. Same thing I'm doing for decrement as well. So we can just have a decrement. Now we can just refresh our function. Here is the increment is there, decrement is there. We can just change it into decrement. Now if I just increment, the value should increment. Yes, the values is decrementing. We can just check out our logger. Yes, the action is triggering, right? So we can just go to here, increment, decrement. Yes, see her action is dispatching here and the values are printing, right? So we have successfully created a Redux store and we have added all the action type and everything, right? So we can just write down the step. After installing Redux store, what we have done, we created our reducer. So this is a simple file, right? So we can just have a file name here. Created our reducer, which is a counter reducer, right? So this is our reducer. Then we created our all action type, added all action type, right? Then we have created our action file. Seventh step is we have created our action, right? So for what are the action here, increment and decrement, these are two action. So we have added two actions here. Then what we done, we attached our reducer into store, right? Then what we have done, we have attached all store values and action to our component, right? To our component. So what we have done here in this home screen, we have attached all action and the reducer value to here, right? So we can just remove this one. We don't need this function anymore, right? Then what we done, dispatched the action, right? So dispatch, the spelling can be call the action. Okay, just write call the action, right? Now the next thing what we are going to do, we are going to hit the API, right? Now what we are to do, we have created a symbol store, we have triggered action, we have manipulated the values in store. Now the next thing is what we are going to do, we are going to hit an API using Redux thunk. Okay, for that one what I am going to do, firstly I am going to create an action type. So every API, so if you are calling an API, there will be two steps, right? API loading, initial step, right? Before we are calling, we will call a loader. Then after response handling will be there. Response handling. Then the third step is loader should be completed. Loader completion, right? So we have to complete the loader whatever we are calling. So we need we need three action type here, right? So we can just create export const API. We can just type API call start, right? So we have created first our action type. Then we can just type export const API call success. Whenever the success is coming, we can just have a success API call success and just add another action type, right? Same case there will be also failure, right? So response can be a success or a failure, right? So we have to handle that one as well. So we can just declare for that one export const API call failure, right? You can just add a API call failure here. Then loaders end, right? Export const, or we can just say API call success failure, but this is needed, right? These three cases is needed. We can handle API call loader completion using API call success method, right? So we can just copy this one. Now I am going to create another reducer, API call reducer. We can just type API call reducer. Yes. Now we need to import this all action type which we have created on action type, right? We can just import all action type. API call start, API call success. Then we need to import API call failure, right? So you can just have API call failure from action type. Fine. Now we can just declare the reducer API reducer. Any name you can do, just for the reference I am just giving the API reducer. So export default API reducer, right? Here I am just added API reducer. Initial state, we can just have an initial state here, const initial state, right? There should be a value and a loader, right? So we can just have an API response we can store in the data, and loader we can just handle by another flag loader. Initial case will be false, so we have add a loader. Then what we can do, we can supply this as an initial value to the state, and then we can just have action. Now we need to create two cases, right? So we can just add a switch action dot type. If it is the API call start, right, we can just type case API call start. We can just have return, so data will be same, so we can just have a spread operator here. All the other flag will be same. Loader we can just set into true, right? Same case we can do here as well. API call stat, right? Now API call success, what we need to do, we need to store the data, right? So that time we can do loader false, and the data type will be action dot payload. We can just type action dot payload, and then again if it is a failure, what we need to do, we can just have API call failure, right? We can have one more thing here, error, sorry, fine. So error also we need to add, so we can just add error as action dot payload, loader will be false. Clear? So we have created an API reducer. Now I'm going to import this API reducer into my store. Here I'm just importing import API reducer from here. What I'm going to do, just importing my reducer API call reducer. Here just I'm adding that reducer into my combine reducer. Fine. Right, so we have created an API reducer. The next thing is we need to dispatch an action, right? Here we need to dispatch a thunk action. For that one, what we can do, we can import all other action type as well. We can just copy it from here. So just paste it here. Right, now what we need to call the API, right? We can just write a function calling an API export API call. You can just type API call. Here we need to create a thunk action. Now if you didn't aware of any thunk action, we can just check out the documentation thunk. So here will be an example. We can just check out any example is available. Now this I don't know, we can just check out Redux thunk example. Yes, here is a Redux thunk example is there. What I'm going to do now, this is also not an API call. We can just type Redux thunk API call. Yes, React Redux handling API call. We can just check out. Yes, this is an API call. We can just check out this API. So you can just check. So this is an API which you can get values. Yes. Now what we need, this is also. Yes, here is a, we can just have a method. So what we can do, we can just inside this one, we can return a dispatch. Fine. Now the next thing is we need to hit the API, right? So we can just hit the API using the fetch method. So API, we can use this JSON placeholder API. I just pasted it here. Then what I need, I just console it here. Dot done rest dot JSON. Then we can just have console the response. Okay, now we can just have the console. If any catch error is coming, we can just have a error method console.log error. Right, I'm not dispatching any action for now. What I'm going to do, just going to use this in my home screen. Here I'm just adding the action, and here also I'm just dispatching the action here. The next thing is what I'm going to do, I'm just adding a button here, view style, just adding a space between this button. We can just have a, yeah, we can just close this here, and then we can just copy this one here, and I'm just going to make this as API code. Right, inside this one I'm just distracting this object API code. Here API code. Now if I just reload my function, I can see API call button. Just reload. We can also open our console. Let us check what are coming. So there is an error is coming. API is returned undefined during initialization. Maybe we have not defined default case. Yes, we don't have default case. We can just have default case here. Return state. Okay. Now what we need to, we can just refresh it is once more here. You can see, yes, my increment functionality is working as it before. API reducer, I can see in my reducer there will be data loader error, right? Now what I am going to do, just I am clicking my button console log, right? There is an error in the action. We can just go to the action. Yes, console log response. Now refresh it once more. just click on the API call. Here you can see response is coming, right? So what I am going to do here, I am going to dispatch a different action on success, right? Now what we need a success action, const API success. Okay, then here we can just have a type. So inside this type, I'm just success for this one. I'm just adding success payload. I can just pass data which I will get through here. Okay, now here also one more thing what I'm going to do, API start, API call start, where I can dispatch the start action, right? So we can just dispatch start action here. Also the failure case also we need to add till API failure, right? Then API failure we can dispatch in this action. Fine. Now here what I am going to do, before the API is calling, I am dispatching the action. You can dispatch the action API call start. So inside this, after getting the response, what I can do, I can dispatch the API success, right? So we can just dispatch API success. We need to have the response, right? We can store the data, right? In the API call reducer, whenever the success is happening, we are just dispatching payload and storing the data, right? So the data should be passed from here. On the error, what we can do, we can just dispatch API failure. This is an error, not data, error. You can just change into data. Payload will be error. Okay, now we can just pass this error here. Fine. Now we have just created all our action. We have just completely called our all action type, right? So now we can just check it once more. Is there any error is coming? No. Now increment decrement action is calling properly. You can see on my screen. I'm just here you can see increment decrement action is calling. Now the API call, yes, API call started. After success, it is storing on the response. Here you can see response is coming. Then it is stored into my data variable, right? So we have successfully called an API using Redux thunk. Now what I am going to do, I am going to attach this all values to my component, right? Here we can just add data. Data is coming on API reducer dot data, right? So we can just have state dot API reducer dot data, and the loader is coming from here, right? So we can just have loader state dot API reducer dot loader, right? Now what we need, we can just import it here. We can just restrict it here, loader data, right? Now what we are going to do, if loader is true, what we can do, we can show an activity indicator. We can just import an activity indicator here. So if you do not know about activity indicator, just go to the documentation, activity indicator in React Native. Here you can see the first one, activity indicator. Just copy this one. We can just copy this one, paste it here, and also try to import in the React Native. Color we can just have the white. Okay. Then if the API success is there, after API loader, we can just have this button. If loader is, we can show the activity indicator. We can just run the example once more. Okay, API call, see loader is coming, API call is coming, right? Now inside this also we can make one more condition. If data is there, we can just have data, otherwise button, right? what is the data? It's an object, so we cannot print it on the text. We can just make it data dot to string, right? We can just make it as string. Fine. Yes, we have called it here, otherwise button will call. Okay, we can just remove this arrow function and just try. And I'm going to hit the API. You can see, yes, data is coming because already stored, that data is stored in the Redux, right? We can just remove this one and just click once more. Here already data is stored. You can see in the API reducer, data is already there. Yes, data is empty only. We have to store. What we can do, length greater than 0, or we can just type object dot keys, right? Object dot keys of data is greater than length. Object dot keys of length right then is equal to yes. Now if I just click API code, right, so data is displaying here, whatever we are receiving object data, right? You can see the object data is printing here. Fine. So we have completed a full-fledged Redux store application using Redux thunk, React Redux, and Redux, right? So we can just check out, we can just write down this other step. For API calling, what we have done, again we have created action types for API call. Right here you can see API call. We are declared two action type, right? API call start for the loading and the success and the failure. Then again we have imported this all into my reducer, combined with reducer. We have created a reducer and combined it with reducer. Then the next thing is separate action. We cannot use a plain action for API calling, right? So we have created a separate action for API calling using thunk. Here we are used thunk, right? In the action, it is not a common action like this, right? We have used a Redux thunk for dispatching the action, right? So we have called API using thunk, then display data. So this much events, this much display data. So this much action or this much step we have to follow for a common Redux, right? Common creation of Redux. Now we are going to replicate this with the same with the toolkit in a single file. So now we can jump into the Redux toolkit example. This with the same example with the Redux toolkit. For that one, what I have done, I have already created a project using the command npx react native init toolkit. You can see the project is running on my device. I have just run the project. Now what I am going to do, I am going to replicate the same Redux example with the Redux toolkit, right? So that we can understand the difference between Redux store and Redux toolkit store. Now for that one, what I am going to do, I am going to install the Redux toolkit library. You can just check out the document here. Here you can see we have to install Redux JS toolkit and React Redux. Okay, so we can just add that library. Previously we have installed three library. Yes, previously we have installed three library: React Redux, React Redux, Redux thunk. Now what we are going to install, Redux JS toolkit and React Redux. Okay, we can just copy this command. I'm going to clear. We can just yarn add. Yes, now these dependencies are installing, which is a Redux toolkit library. Now what I am going to do, I am going to create the UI for that one as it before. What we can do, we can just import our project, new project into this one, Redux toolkit. So this is our previous project, Redux store. So we can just copy the home screen from here and just copy the home screen. Okay, then what we can do, we can just create an src folder here. Src, you can just create a new folder, not file, delete this one. You can just create a new folder. Okay, so src, inside that src we are going to create a new file, home screen .js. So hit creator, we can just copy this one, we can remove all the Redux code, we can just remove the connect and everything, only UI need to be persisted, we can just remove all other things. We can just remove this one as well and this one. Okay, now yes, home screen, we need to export this one, we can just export default home screen. Okay, also we can just remove this function, we can just have a console log here. Okay, same for decrements and same for API calling. Okay, now what we can do, we can just import this into our app.js file as done before. You can just go to the app.js file, remove all this code. You can remove all this code, just import home screen from src home screen. Okay, now what we can do, we can remove all this code as well. And then we can just remove the node.js as well, we can just remove the node.js. Here we can, this one also we can remove, just add the home screen here. And then also we can remove the style which is generated by React Native. Okay, now we can just run. Here you can see increment is there, decrement is there, API call also is there, right? Now what we need to set up our Redux store using Redux Toolkit. For that one, we can just refer the document. Here you can see there is a store.file which is creating. So we can just create our store.js. Okay, so inside this store we have to create our store. We can just copy this command, import configure store Redux Toolkit. Here we can just add the store, export store. Fine. Here we don't want this one because we are not using our TypeScript, so we just need to import store. And inside app.js, what I need is I need to import provider from React Redux. Now what I am going to, as I done before, provider store, we can just supply store equal to store. Okay, now just close this one, just encapsulate home screen into our prod. Now we need to import store, we can just import store, right? So you can just import store from src store. Okay, now what we can do, we can just run the project. If the project is running fine, we are facing some issue, cannot read property get state of undefined, the error is coming from here, right? So we just need to add a bracket. Now we can just run. Yes, see, it's running properly, we are getting the increment and decrement, our store is defined. We can just console dot log, you can just console store dot get state is working perfectly. We can just remove this one and run once again. Go to the debugger, we can just connect this project into debugger, you can just debug right now. Yes, store does not have valid reducer. You make sure that you have passed the combined reducer in object host, because we have just added an object only for the store, right? Still, look at the example here. What we can do with one simple step, we have created a store, right? Previously what we are doing here, we are installing multiple libraries, Redux thunk, Redux logger, and we are creating the store and we are combining the reducer, lot of tasks, right? In Redux Toolkit, with a single two step, you can create a reducer, you can create a store. Now what I am going to do, I am going to add my reducer, a valid reducer should be passed, right? So I am going to add a reducer. Here I am just going to create one reducer, counter reducer, which we have created earlier, right? Counter reducer.js. So inside this counter.js, I'm just creating my reducer. Here you can see I'm just importing the slides. Okay, import Redux Toolkit slides. So this is a method from Redux Toolkit. We can just copy from here, create slides. Okay, then what we can do, we can just create an initial state. I'm just going to create an initial state. Okay, so this should be an object. I'm just creating an initial state where I'm just passing my value counter as it before, right? So inside Redux toolkit, Redux example also, we have just passed our initial value, right? We have just passing the value same as it here. So I'm just passing my initial value. Now the next thing is what I'm going to do. I'm going to export my reducer. I'm going to create a reducer using slice. So here you can see the method. Here you can see export const. This is the method to create a reducer. Previously, how we are created a reducer? Previously, we have created a reducer using a simple function, and function is to be exported, right? In Redux toolkit, what we can do, we can just create a reducer using the method create slice. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just scoping this old method. Okay, just scoping this old method. We can just cross verify one by time, create slice, which we have imported here, and I am giving a name to the reducer counter. Initial value I am passing here. In the reducers, what I am going to do here, I will do once more. I'm just doing one thing. What I am going to do, this reducer I am going to explain once more. Here I am going to do declare reducers. So the basic difference between Redux toolkit and Redux store, what is? So here we are creating action separately, action type is separately, and then we are calling that action in reducer. Reducer only handle the state management, right? But in Redux toolkit, what you can do, you can initialize the initial state, and also in the reducer also we can create the action. What I am going to do, I am going to have, we have two action, right? Increment and decrement. So I am going to type two action. Here you can see increment, like this increment. I'm just calling an increment. Instead that I will get the current state. Now what I need to do, I need to return the value which I need. You can see here, right? This kind of declaration, just add this declaration here. Okay, here I am getting the value. Just what I need to do, I'm just returning the value, whatever the value which we need. So we can just return the value, whatever the value is changing, we can just return. Here you can see, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to return my value. I'm going to increment count is equal to plus equal to 1, or yes, like this. Now for the decrement, I'm just declaring another function, decrement. Same thing we can just do. We can just update the value, whatever we are going to update. We can just update state dot counter -1. So we have created two action with the reducer. The important difference with toolkit and the Redux store, what will be? In Redux store, we will write the separate action in separate file, action type in separate file. Now and we will combine reducer with another file. We will create reducer in another file. But in Redux toolkit, what we are doing, we are just combining in everything in a single file. Here is the reducer which managing our value, and these are my action which I am going to execute for changing my value. Now how we can use this reducer into my project, right? So what we can do, we can just go to the example. Here you can see how can I get the action and reducer separately, right? So this is a combined value of action and reducer, right? For that one, for getting const, for declaring, for using it the value, what you need to do, just declare as like this. Here you can see there counter slide dot action, you will get all the action we need. Counter slide dot draw reducer, we will get all the reducer what we need. We can just import increment decrement is equal to counter slice dot actions, right? Now for the reducer, what you need to export, we can just export default counter slice dot, we can just check what are the exports available. Case reducer available, get initial state is available, we can just export in reducer. Clear? Now what we have done, in a single file, we have created the reducer and the action simultaneously, right? Now what we can do, we can just import this reducer into my store. Go to the store. Here we can just import counter reducer from counter, and then here we can just add counter is equal to counter reducer. Now if I just run the command, let's see what's happening. Yes, here you can see the value is printing whatever the value we have declared on the state. Here you can see counter reduce. If I change the value into 5, just see, here you can see the value is coming as 5. Now how we can access the value? We can just access the value using selector. Okay, we can just add import, we can just add our selectors. So we can just go for the selectors. You can just go to here, inside this component we can just import use selector and use dispatch in the home screen, rather than connecting. In previously what we are doing, we are connecting map state props, right? For accessing the values and function, we are just connecting map state props and the action, right? Here what you can do, just you can use selector and use dispatch for dispatching the action. And I am also going to import my action, right? We need action, so we can just go to the here, these are to my action, increment and decrement, okay, from counter reducer. Clear? So we have created a reducer for managing our values, and the functions, the actions also in the same file. Okay, so that is a very important logic. We have created our Redux, and inside the reducer we are managing our state as well, we are managing our action as well. Now what we can do, we can just select our counter value. We can just print here const counter use selector state dot counter. Okay, we can just print the value of counter. We can just print the value of counter, console dot log counter. Okay, now if I just go here, let's see what happened. Yes, the value is printing here, right? You can see counter 5. I'm just adding one more layer to the counter value. Now we can just directly print the value here, see 5. Now what I need to just pass it here on the text. We can just remove the props dot counter. Now we don't want the props right now. You can just add this as a arrow function and just run the function once more. Here you can see 5 is coming, right? Now the next thing is we need an increment decrement functionality here, right? So we need an increment and decrement button here, right? We have an increment decrement button. Whenever I am clicking, I need to dispatch an action and I need to decrement the value or increment the value, right? So we have already imported the action. Now what we need to do, we need to dispatch this action, right? For that one, what we can do, we can just call our dispatch method, dispatch. Okay, then use dispatch. Here we can just import that hook. Okay, then what we can do, we can just import in the increment. I am going to call the increment action. Here I am just adding the increment action. Okay, then here what I am going to do, I am going to decrement the action, decrement. Fine. Now what we can just refresh the function. We can refresh the app once again and we can just try increment. Yes, the value is incrementing and decrementing, right? Now if I just decrement here, so decrement functionality has some problem. We can just check out what is happening on decrement. Dispatch decrement is there right here. Counter reducer decrement is there, state counter minus. Okay, here we didn't add the equal to button. Okay, we can just add equal to, and then again we can refresh the function. Now go here, increment. Here you can see increment, then decrement. The values are decrementing. Now the next thing is what we have missed. We have missed to add Redux logger, right? So we can just search how to add Redux logger to toolkit. Okay, we can just install the library meanwhile, yarn add redux logger. Okay, so Redux logger is installing. Now inside here you can see one method, get default middleware. So we can just copy that one. So you can just add Redux logger with single statement. Just go to the store. Here I am going to import my Redux logger. Here in the configure store we have already passed our reducer. Then what we need to pass next? Middleware. So we can just call this middleware. Okay, then we can just paste it here. So middleware is a callback, so it will get the default middleware, just concat logger. So it will concat our logger into middleware. Now we can just refresh our project. Let's see. Now increment, here you can see the action is triggering, right? Just like as previous, we can add an increment logger here. Then if I just decrement, same thing. Fine. So we have successfully integrated logger into our Redux toolkit. Just simple one line, middleware get middleware dot concat. Okay, so you can just integrate middleware into Redux logger. Now if I just compare with our previous store here, so this is our previous store, right? So we can just compare both two. Here within 11 line of code, I just completed all the functionality which I am going to create using here Redux logger. So this is very simple, right? You can just create a Redux toolkit store very simply with a simple line of codes. Now the next thing is what we are going to do. We are going to hit the API. For that one, what I am going to do, I am going to create one more reducer which we have created, API reducer .js, right? Yes, one important thing which I have missed in this Redux toolkit, we didn't created any action type, right? Here you can see we have created number of action type, increment, decrement, and we have used it to export in this another file, and we reducer also we need to export, right? But in Redux toolkit, we don't want to create the action type. Okay, you can see action type is manually automatically created when we are adding a action. Here you can see the action type is counter / increment. So how this is coming, the name is coming from here. If I just change it here, you can see now if I refresh my function once more, you can see my action type is changing. Increment, now just go here, you can see counteracts / increment. So the action type is automatically created, right? I just don't want to create any action type manually. In the previous example, Redux store example, we have created all the action type one by one. So this is another advantage of Redux toolkit. We don't want to create action type manually. Clear? Right now what we left is API calling. So there are multiple ways you can call the API in Redux toolkit using RTK query, create async thunk. There are multiple ways. I'm not going to the detail, I'm just going to the simplest method. Here what I'm going to do, inside my API reducer, what I'm going to do, I'm going to import my slice. Just import my slice, and I'm going to copy my previous API calling action. Here this is the action which we have used for Redux store, and I'm just pasting it here. We don't want to dispatch action as we have not declared any action. We can just remove this everything. Okay, then we can just console the response, console.log response, and also we can just console the response if anything come. Okay, now we can just import this API call into our home screen. So we can just import this API call into home screen. Fine. Now we need to dispatch this API call on button click, right? So for that one, what we can do, we can just dispatch API call. Fine. Now what we need, we can just go to the debugger. Let's see what's happening. Refresh the function. Sorry. And just click API call. We can just check API call is not a function, so we can just go to the definition API call. No, the API call is another reducer, so we can just create another reducer, API call from API reducer, not counter reducer. We have just missed that one. We can just refresh the function once more and try to call the API. Yes, we are getting the response as we got previously, right? We are getting the response from here. Now what we need to create all our reducer just created for API reducer, right? We have just created all the action type and reducer, right? Now what we can do, we can just copy the initial state inside this slice. Okay, so we can just slice. Now what we need, we can just go to the counter slice. We can just create a API reducer, export const API reducer using the method create slice, right? We can just copy this one, create slice, and we can have a name API reducer. API reducer, and the values we can just pass initial state. Here is initial state. Then we can just add reducers, right? We can just have a reducers here. Now we have multiple reducers, right? In the Redux Toolkit, we have created three type of reducer. One is calling starting, calling success, then API dispatch failure. So we can just go to the actions, copy the same name. Okay, so we can just copy API call start. So here we can just add API call start. We will get the state here. Inside this state, what we are going to do, we are going to only change what we are going to change here, loader. So we can just have loader is equal to true. Okay, so we just change it as counter reducer. How we are changing the value here, just you can see this is a function, not a, so you can just change as same as increment. Okay, so we can just copy this increment. Fine, now just replace this API call start. You can just, yes, now only need to change the value of loader, right? We can just state loader is equal to true. When the API call start, the state loader value will be true. Same thing we can do for another actions. The upcoming action, we can API success. API success also the same. So we can just have state. Okay, now we can just have the state. What are the values going to change? Loader value going to change, right? State dot loader, this will be false, and also state dot data will be action dot payload, right? We need the payload, right? We can just split as state. Here we can just add action as well. Let's see what's happening. Action. Now we can just don't set the value, we can just have here. Now also one more action we can have to be the failure, right? So we can just copy the action name API failure. We can just add it here, API failure state. Then we can just have state dot loader is equal to false. Also we need to set errors, right? We can just copy this one, we can just print what the value is coming. We can just print console.log action, sorry, action. Now what we need to call this action here, right? So we can just dispatch API call start here, and also API success, we are just dispatch API success with the response, right? And API failure with the error method. Okay, we can just dispatch API error with error. Fine, you can just remove this console, or we can just have an enter here. Fine. Now what we need to import this, we need to export this method, or we need to import the reducer, right? So we can just call export default API reducer. We have to just export the reducer. We can just import the reducer into home reducer. Go here, import API reducer from API reducer. So in the same thing, Redux Toolkit, what we have done, we can just have API reducer. Fine, same. Now we can just refresh the function. Let's see what's happening. Click on the API code. There is one, but the API code is not defined. Yes, we have to export the name in the API reducer. So we can just export const. So we can just export API call start, API success, API failure from API reducer dot. So how we are added here dot action, right? So we can just copy here dot action. So these values are we are using here. We are just created from here and exported from here, and we are using the value here, right? Clear? Now what we can do for the same for reducer, we can just have dot reducer. So what we have done, basically we have created all our action here and exported here. That value we have just used it to dispatch action here, right? Clear? Now we can just check what is happening. Refresh the function once more. So there is no error in the existing code. Increment decrement is working perfectly. We can just go for API call. API is calling here. You can see API reducer, API caller is coming here. See, API reducer, API success is coming. Now we have added the action console here, right? Action console here, right? So we can just here you can see action is coming as payload and type. Now what we need to do, we need to add the value here, right? So we can just add state dot data is equal to action dot payload. So here you can see action is coming, right? Action is coming with a type and payload. So we only need payload. We can just add the payload here, and also if any error comes, okay, so we can just add state dot error come, it will come on action dot payload. We can just set into action dot payload. Now we can just remove this one, okay, and run the function, run the app once more. Increment and decrementing working perfectly. The next thing is we need API code. Here you can see API code is coming. If I just check into my values, here you can see data is coming, loader is coming, right? Now what we can do, we can just add the logic as before on the home screen. Oh, here is the data. Just copy this all into our home screen, paste it here. Okay, fine. Now we can just have the dispatch on here rather than just calling API, dispatch API call, and we need the data, right? How we can get the data? We can just get the data using the selector. Use selector state dot, it is coming on not on the counter, it is coming on API reducer, right? So we can just have API reducer, right? So this data will coming here. So data is coming, data dot loading loader. Also we can just have data const loader, same thing, use selector, we can just use selector, and also loader is coming on the value loader, right? So we can just have loader. Now if I just refresh the function once more, let's see what's happened. So we don't want the second API code, right? We can just remove this one, which is the previous one. And if I refresh the function once more, we can see API call button is there. Now let's deeply look into the console. I'm just incrementing, decrementing, it is working perfectly. Then what we can do, we can just hit the API code. Here you can see as it done in the Redux store, it is rendering correctly, right? So if you just check out into here, you can see data is stored here, loader values also there, error is not coming. So what we have done, we have hit the API using Redux Toolkit here, right? So we don't want to install a separate library Redux thunk. It is already inbuilt, is coming on Redux Toolkit. We don't want to declare any action type. We don't want to declare any reducer. Everything is managed in the single file. Now if you look into the structure, so API reducer here, counter reducer here, both logic are managed in the single file. But meanwhile in the Redux store, we have an action file, we have action type file, then API calling for API reducer is there, then counter reducer is there, then store is all the values. We have a lot of code for Redux store. So we have separately shown how to create a store using Redux store and Redux Toolkit. So these are the main advantage of Redux Toolkit. We have a lot of built-in functionalities available in Redux Toolkit. Now we can jump into the next lecture.